The Reserve Bank makes it very clear there are no interest rate cuts on the horizon. Universities warn that 14,000 jobs could go. And Google is ruled to have been quashing competition in a judgement with potentially huge ramifications for search. Welcome to Fear and Greed Daily Business News. For people who make their own decisions, it is Wednesday, the 7th of August, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, the Reserve Bank has dashed hopes for a rate cut anytime soon, worried that inflation is falling slower than it previously thought.
The central bank yesterday left the benchmark cash rate at 4.35%, the levels it's been for 9 months, saying inflation is still some way above the midpoint of the 2 to 3% target range. Governor Michelle Bullock said only two options were considered at the bank's board meeting: raise or hold, and hold for a while. She said a near-term reduction in the cash rate doesn't align with the board's current thinking, pouring cold water on hopes rates would fall before the end of this year. The bank has pushed out to the middle of 2026 when it thinks inflation will return to around 2.5%. That's because the economy is growing a bit faster than the Reserve Bank expected, and there isn't enough capacity to meet the high demand. But there is plenty of uncertainty in all this. The bank says there is still upside risks to inflation, especially services inflation. Also, wages growth has peaked, but it's still too high. On the other hand, momentum in economic activity has been weak. There's also uncertainty around how long monetary policy takes to work and what's going on overseas. The money comment in all this was at the very end of the statement. It said that returning inflation to target is the priority. What's not said in that, it's not about full employment. It's all about inflation.
So what was the response to the announcement? Because I know everyone kind of watches for 2:30 p.m. to come around, and the moment that it happens, kind of everyone's kind of waiting with bated breath. What was the response to the announcement? And then I suppose what was the response to Governor Michelle Bullock's press conference afterwards as well? Because you get a lot more insight then, don't you?
Yeah, you sure do. There wasn't a huge amount going on immediately afterwards. Equities didn't do much. There wasn't a lot going on with the dollar. It jumped up just a little bit. It's trading around 65 US cents. When asked about all the turmoil in financial markets in recent days, the governor basically said it didn't play a role in the board's deliberations. She also said it's important to resist peer pressure. So she was asked about, everyone else is cutting interest rates. We've had the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, Bank of Canada cut rates. US Fed's talking about it. Doesn't that put pressure on her? And she basically came out and said it's important to resist peer pressure. The overwhelming feeling after yesterday's announcement and press conference is that the Reserve Bank is just still some way away from even thinking about cutting interest rates. And that, I think that surprised some people that rates are on hold, and just the fact that they're still talking about higher interest rates and still such a prominent part of their discussion, just a little more hawkish, a little more worried about what's going on in inflation than people perhaps had hoped.
The fact that cutting wasn't really part of the discussion at all, I suppose, may be a bit surprising. And you actually put that to our guest today that you're speaking to after the show. And if you're going to talk to anybody today to get an insight into this decision by the Reserve Bank Board, this is the person to speak to, Lucy Ellis, Chief Economist at Westpac.
Yeah, so Lucy 12 months ago, or a little less than 12 months ago, was actually the Chief Economist at the Reserve Bank. So she knows exactly how the bank operates. She says something really interesting in this about how the central bank is now framing monetary policy. She actually gives it a bit of a take, and she said she was somewhat surprised by some of the things that came out yesterday, and she talks about that, things like the aggregate demand in the economy and supply in the economy, and the timing of how the Reserve Bank is thinking about when it should move on rates. She is really fascinating because of all the people in the market, she's the one that knows the inside of the bank as well as anyone.
Yeah, it is a fascinating interview, so well worth sticking around for. It's coming up after the show. Okay, local markets, how did they perform yesterday?
Given the big sell-off on Wall Street on Monday night, yesterday's performance was pretty encouraging. The S&P ASX 200 closed up almost 0.5% to 7,681 points. Now, of course, the previous two sessions, Friday last week, Monday this week combined, sent the bourse down 5.5%. Generally, it was the interest rate sensitive stocks that did best. Industrial property giant Goodman Group led the way, following some big falls from Goodman the previous couple of sessions. Wesfarmers also outperformed, as did energy giant Santos, Macquarie Group, and some US-focused companies like Brambles and Aristocrat Leisure. They all did pretty well as well. The uranium miners, they were up. One company that didn't do well was imaging group Pro Medicus. It tumbled 7%. The worst of the top 200, although there wasn't really any news to explain why. Mind you, Pro Medicus is up about 70% over the past year. It's always worth looking at the banks in these times. While Commonwealth Bank jumped 2.4% yesterday, and Westpac and National Australia Bank were up about 1%. ANZ actually dropped slightly, but all the banks are still some way below their recent peaks. Now, their recent peaks of Wednesday, Thursday last week. The big four banks represent 4 of the 6 largest companies on the bourse. So what they do really matters. National Australia Bank is off 9% over the past week. Commonwealth Bank's off 8%. Westpac and ANZ are off 7%. That's a lot of value out of the market in those 5 days.
Yeah, certainly is. What about international markets? What's the latest?
Well, Michael, yesterday we talked about how the Japanese market fell 13% on Monday. Yesterday, it was up 10%. With exporters like tech companies and oil makers leading the way. Come see, come sa, easy come, easy go, however you want to put it.
Up and down like a fiddler's elbow, Sean.
I've never heard, like a fiddler's elbow. The Japanese market is very much like a fiddler's elbow.
Well, I'm glad I could contribute something to the show today. Here you are, providing all of this kind of analysis and insight and all the latest kind of news. And all I give you is a fiddler's elbow.
Fiddler's elbow. I like it, though. I might use it myself. Oil's also recovered somewhat from its 7-month low earlier in the week. Attention is now very much refocusing on the troubles in the Middle East. Brent's trading around $78 a barrel. Traders are still bracing for retaliatory action by Iran and regional militias on Israel. That's after the assassinations of Hezbollah and Hamas officials. Although Tehran has come out and reiterated it wants to avoid all-out war. Gold's come back a bit. It's trading around $2,400 an ounce. The Aussie, as I mentioned before, is around 65 US cents. Cryptos are also down. They came off a lot yesterday, and they're still down a bit. Bitcoin's trading around $55,000 a unit.
Sean, speaking of news and analysis and insight, there has never been a more important time to head along to the Fear and Greed website, fearandgreed.com.au, and sign up for our free weekly newsletter, because it comes out today. It comes out in just a couple of hours' time, mid-morning. It's more than a couple of hours, really, isn't it? But I've rounded down. But, Sean, the podcast is all about the news. The newsletter is the views. And so that's why I think it is absolutely vital. Go to the website, sign up. The newsletter is entirely free, and you will be privy to everything that is going on inside Sean Aylmer's head.
And it's quite a ride up there, I've got to tell you.
Oh,
it's quite a ride.
Yeah. It feels like we need a sealed section of the newsletter. Just like Dolly used to have,
or a section that you can put some spice into or something, because there's a lot of really boring stuff in my mind.
I led us there. And then once I didn't want to be there.
I'm trying to get us out.
Yeah, goodness me. Anyway, go to the website, fearandgreed.com.au, sign up for the newsletter. It's out this morning, so now's a perfect opportunity to do it. In the meantime, Sean, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, universities are warning that 14,000 jobs could go as the government pushes ahead with its plan to cap international student numbers, a policy that institutions say will have a catastrophic effect on the sector.
Universities Australia Chief Executive Luke Sheehy told a parliamentary inquiry the government was using students as cannon fodder and unfairly blaming them for the housing crisis. He said proposed legislation to cap international student numbers was poll-driven and a political smokescreen as the Labor government tries to gain an upper hand in the migration battle ahead of the next election. This is according to a report in Nine Media. Sheehy said that even without the proposed student caps, the government had already taken a sledgehammer to the international education sector, with visa grant rates down 23%, or almost 60,000 students over the past year. He said that number already represents a $4.3 billion hit to the economy and could cost the university sector alone over 14,000 jobs. The federal government has since tightened visa rules to make it harder for international students to come in the country, as it uses the sector as a key mechanism to slash migration. Big battle ahead there.
The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is under pressure, Sean, to take stern action on Iran's ambassador in Canberra after social media comments which called for a, quote, wiping out of Israelis in Palestine by 2027 and also referred to Israelis as a, quote, Zionist plague.
Mr Albanese called the comments abhorrent and hateful, saying they had no place. The remarks were made by Ambassador Ahmed Sadeghi over the weekend, and the Prime Minister said that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade had held talks with the ambassador since then, though there's no indication of any disciplinary action. The coalition called for him to be kicked out of the country. Meanwhile, news that the government is looking to create a new special visa pathway for Palestinians so they don't have to return to Gaza has prompted questions over necessary security checks. Yesterday, the government was on the defensive. Assistant Minister for Trade Tim Ayres said that Tony Burke, who's the Immigration Minister, was laser-focused on security checks for Palestinian refugees coming from Gaza.
Thousands of Australian travellers will be granted express entry into the United States from late next year after Australia was granted access to the US Global Entry Program.
In the first phase of the deal, about 1,000 Australians who have travelled to the US 5 or more times in the past 12 months will be granted expedited entry into America. A second phase, which requires laws to be passed in Parliament in Canberra, will allow an unlimited number of Australians quick entry into the US, according to a report in the Financial Review. Australia joins a list of other nations, including the UK and Singapore, that are taking part in the program, in which time-sensitive transit information is shared quickly with the US. It's all about boosting business between the two countries. Australia's participation in the Global Entry Program was announced back in 2018, hit barriers in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. Anyway, it's up and running again, makes it a lot easier to get in and out of the US.
Sean, Penfolds owner Treasury Wine Estates will sell its more affordable wine brands, including Wolf Blass, Lindeman's, Yellow Glen and Blossom Hill, as that segment suffers from an exodus of budget-strapped drinkers.
As part of a structural review that Treasury has been working on for most of this year, it will exit its commercial wine brands, is how they put it. They're basically bottles of wine that sell for around $10. There may be other sales as well, pending on the review, and Treasury hopes to outline its future operating model at its full-year result, which is August 15. Consumers globally are shifting to higher-priced, higher-quality bottles of wine, but they're actually consuming less as well. Now, about 75% of Treasury's profit comes from the Penfolds business, which has been split out on its own, and also its luxury wine portfolio in the United States. Now, the proposed divestment of the 4 large commercial brands adds to the big changes that are going on in that sector. Last month, French group Pernod Ricard said it's selling its Jacobs Creek brand to Accolade Wines, which is another one of Australia's big wine players. Certainly lots going on in that segment of the market.
Woodside's share price fell more than 5% yesterday to its lowest level since early 2022 after saying it'll spend $3.7 billion to buy a low-carbon ammonia project in Texas.
The project is under construction and expects the first batch of ammonia to be available next year. Now, you know the great thing about these sort of stories, I know absolutely nothing about ammonia, and Texas and ammonia particularly.
So it's quite a niche topic, isn't it?
It is. So did you know ammonia? So it's mostly used in agriculture as fertilizer, which ag being one of the big boom areas over the next, decade, century or so. We need to produce a lot more. So fertilizer really matters. So ammonia matters. It's also a refrigerant gas, and it's used in the making of plastics, textiles, and explosives. Interesting. It actually is derived from natural gas. I didn't realise that. The thing I definitely didn't know, it's also a major producer of CO2. In fact, ammonia production accounts for around 1.8% of global carbon dioxide emissions.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
That I am genuinely, I know my kind of surprised voice and face kind of both looks and sounds sarcastic, but I'm genuinely surprised by that. 1.8%. Just from ammonia production.
Yeah, well, that's according to the Royal Society of the UK, which who am I to argue with them?
Oh, I'm not going to pick a fight with them. They sound very official. Please go on.
Totally. So companies like Woodside are pushing into what they call lower carbon ammonia. So essentially it means manufacturing ammonia, but actually having a carbon sequestration with it. Now, in this case, they're talking about carbon capture and storage. So it's actually not so much the production process reducing the amount of carbon that's emitted. It's actually capturing the carbon and doing something with it, which is why this is a low carbon ammonia plant. I knew none about that until I did research on this story. That's one of the great things about Fear and Greed and doing this job is that you get to find out all this stuff that you wouldn't know otherwise.
You know what I love in particular about that is our bonus podcast, Ask Fear and Greed, which comes out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So there was an episode out yesterday, and it comes out midday on a Tuesday and Thursday. And it's where we answer listener questions. And you've got to go back and listen to you have to go back and listen to yesterday's question because it came from Haley. And it was about when we say that markets have priced in the chance of a rate cut. What does that mean? Where does that kind of pricing in come from? How do you calculate the percentage? And you did a lot of research.
It's hard to understand. So we did this show and that's fine. Last night I was in the shower and I thought, actually, all it is, when you've been doing something and then like 4 hours later, or in this case it was like 12 hours later, just hit me. I thought, all it is just like the price of a bond relative to the benchmark interest rate. That's it. It's that gap.
Anyway, if you want to hear Sean take 5 minutes to explain what he just explained in 5 seconds, go and check out Ask Fear and Greed from yesterday because it is actually a lot of fun, but it's also a way to learn more about a whole bunch of different topics.
Or get confused.
Yeah. If there's something that you would like us to shed a bit of light on, whether it's about markets or economics or anything to do with finance and business, then send it on through via the website or our social media platforms and we will get to it. And yesterday was really just a treat, wasn't it, Sean? We must move on. The Queensland government, facing defeat at the October election, is making some fairly drastic promises to turn around its ailing fortunes.
I'm loving this election because Stephen Miles, the Premier, is promising all sorts of things, a little off left field often. Now, he used his annual State of State addresses yesterday to announce that a re-elected Labor government would open 12 publicly owned fuel stations. The government will own the fuel stations and they'll introduce a cap on daily petrol price increases of no more than 5 cents a litre. And if a service station is changing prices, it needs to release that information a day in advance so you can go and get your petrol before it goes up. Now, the Liberal National Party opposition called it economic vandalism that would push out independent operators. Of course, we've had a few other crackers from the Queensland government. Of course, the 50-cent public transport fares, which is going on at the moment. There's the $1,000 electricity rebates to every household. There's a reduction in car registrations of about 20%. When the Reserve Bank starts complaining at some point about government spending too much money, you know where they're going to be looking.
At least you know what? These are some creative ideas, right?
They are. That's true.
Yeah. I love a bit of creativity in politics.
You want state-owned petrol stations, and this is nothing like what they're talking about, but it does sort of remind me of some old Soviet 1970s movie where people are lining up for gas.
To get their fuel rations.
To get the fuel rations, that's it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You get like a little cupful every day. Anyway. We are getting way off topic here, Sean. We've got a few big stories still to get through. International news. A judge has ruled that Google's ubiquitous search engine has been illegally exploiting its dominance to squash competition and stifle innovation in a major decision that has the potential now to shake up the internet and really actually hobble one of the world's best-known companies.
The highly anticipated decision issued by the US District Court comes nearly a year after the start of a trial pitting the US Justice Department against Google in the country's biggest antitrust showdown in a quarter of a century. After reviewing reams and reams of evidence that included testimony from top executives at Google, Microsoft, Apple, during last year's 10-week trial, Judge Amit Mehta concluded that Google is a monopolist. I can hardly say that word, a monopolist, and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly. The judge said Google's dominance in the search market is evidence of its monopoly, according to a report on Associated Press. Google enjoys an 89.2% share of the market for general search services, 94.9% on mobile devices, the ruling said. It represents a big setback for Google and its parent, Alphabet, which argued its popularity stemmed from consumers' overwhelming desire to use a search engine so good at what it does that it's become synonymous with looking things up online. Google's search engine processes an estimated 8.5 billion queries per day, nearly double its daily volume from 12 years ago. Google does intend to appeal the findings, but we've been waiting for this one, and it's a big one.
It certainly is. Now, Starbucks, Sean, is finding the going tough, suffering a second straight quarterly drop in sales, increasing pressure now on the group's leadership team.
The world's largest coffee chain cited a cautious consumer environment when reporting a 3% drop in global comparable sales for the 3 months at the end of June. The March quarter, that was off 4%. The disappointing results come as Starbucks negotiates with an activist investor, Elliott Investment Management, which has been seeking changes at the board level and at the management level. The board and management have also faced public critique from Howard Schultz. Now, he's quite famous in Starbucks. 3 times he's been the chief executive. He's done it, left again, then came back. They keep bringing him back to help build up the company. He first took the reins in 1985. He remains its 6th largest shareholder. But Starbucks isn't quite ubiquitous with coffee, but certainly the best known coffee chain seems to be struggling a bit.
Yeah. All right. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Your guest today, Lucy Ellis, Chief Economist at Westpac and former Chief Economist at the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, it's a fantastic insight into how the Reserve Bank thinks and what's going on around interest rates following yesterday's announcement that interest rates are on hold and will be on hold for some time.
Yeah, it is a must listen. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, which is also where you sign up for the free weekly newsletter out a little bit later on today. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Wednesday, the 7th of August, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.